has had a very solid first term after flipping the seat from longtime Republican John Culberson. She has promised to protect the thousands of energy jobs there in the energy corridor and attack flooding issues like Harvey. She is facing West Point graduate and former Army chopper pilot Wesley Hunt, who says no Democrat can protect energy jobs when those at the top of the ticket are for the Green New Deal. Healthcare has been a big deal in this race, with Hunt claiming he would protect those with pre-existing conditions. Lizzie Fletcher saying that's not true because you're trying to knock out the Affordable Care Act, the only statutory guarantee. So lots to watch tonight, and those are two of the battleground races.
All right, so much to cover. Greg, thank you very much. We'll check in a little bit later in this as well. Now, as the returns start to come in, they start counting. We're going to break down what they mean. And with that, let's turn to some expertise, members of the What's Your Point panel. Let's bring them on up to the screen here. Jackie Bally, political professor at the University of Houston downtown. Good to see you, Jackie. Charles Blaines, founder of Urban Reform. Senior legal analyst Chris Tritico. Carmen Rowe, Houston attorney, and Tony Diaz, host of Latino Politics and News on KPFT Radio. Good to see you all. So let's start with the elephant and the donkey in the room, the presidential election, and where Texas will fall as a battleground state in this election. Jackie, I had a good idea how you're going to go with this, but let me start with you.
Yes, Texas definitely is a battleground state. We are seeing record numbers coming out in Harris County and Fort Bend County. The odds are that the president will hang on to the lead, but it will be a very tight race. And we're going to see the same way we saw in a surge of voters coming out in the urban areas. We're also seeing a surge of voters coming out in the rural areas. So this is good. This is what part of the process, and we're enjoying it all. But the president is going to hold on to his lead.
All right, other end of the spectrum, Tony Diaz, weigh in.
How much you betting on that, Jackie? I hope you didn't put a mortgage or tuition on that, because here's what I want to remind folks about. It's such a battleground. We gotta give a shout out to Beto O'Rourke, who came within 2 points of defeating Ted Cruz. And here's why I bring that up. Texans have been used to splitting their ballot since then, because if you'll remember, Ted Cruz, unpopular figure. I don't want to bicker about that right now. However, Abbott, at that same race, 2008, Abbott wins by 13%. Ted Cruz scrapes by 2%. Same Republican Party, same Texas voters. I'm really fascinated to see how Texans are going to split their ballot, because it's going to split. And I think Trump is not going to do as well as Cornyn. And down ballot, let's see where that Democratic wave stops, or if it topples everybody.
Well, before we go to the down ballot, let's stick with the president here. As we know, we're seeing 7% of precincts reporting in Texas. Very tight. President Trump, 50%. Joe Biden, 49%. Carmen, is it going to stay that tight?
I think it's going to. I mean, this is the first time that it's ever gotten this close to being blue in Texas for quite a while. And so, we'll see what happens. With all the record numbers of people coming out, especially younger voters, I think it's anybody's game. So I think we're going to have to watch it really closely.
Charles, pick that up from where she left off. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to have to argue that I think the lead's going to expand. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of the major urban counties, those votes are going to come in earlier. They're processing them faster. They have the equipment to do so. And I think a lot of the rural counties where we know that's Trump country and it was in 2016, they're going to take a little longer to come in. And I think as they do come in, we're going to start to see that spread widen. And I think even some of the South Texas counties are going to come in for Trump, and that might be surprising to a lot. But I think we're seeing across the country that a lot of Hispanic folks are breaking for Trump this time, which is something that they didn't expect. So I think we're going to see that lead expand as we go throughout the night.
And Chris, I want to turn to you here as well. As we look at those numbers, 9 million votes in change for each of the two candidates. These are early votes. These are mail-in votes. These are not the voters who showed up today primarily, and largely it is Republican voters traditionally who show up on election day in a state like Texas.
Well, historically speaking, when you have a large early vote turnout, that trends in favor of the Democrats. And so I think you're going to see that's going to hold true here. But let's look at what Texas has been doing for the last 4 or 5 election cycles. It's been trending blue every cycle. And in 2016, you had almost every major metropolitan area blue. And Tarrant County went blue in 2016 by 100 votes. If Tarrant County goes blue this time by a large margin, Texas is going to go with Joe Biden, because that will be every major metropolitan county in Texas voting blue, and that will carry the state. And so Tarrant County is what we need to be watching tonight in Texas, because that really is where we need to be looking. And if Tarrant County goes blue, Texas is gone.
Well, the polls have been closed just under 15 minutes at this point. Let's talk about what Greg Rugen was talking about, primarily the Texas Senate race, MJ Hagar and incumbent John Cornyn. Tony, Greg says this is likely going to lean toward the incumbent staying in office. What say you, and why?
Again, I've got a dead heat. I mean, flip a coin. And again, if you just watch all the commercials, I've got a stack of mailers. I've never seen Democrats competing at this level before. I don't think Cornyn's ever had to campaign this hard. And here's one signal. Here is one signal. When you hear John Cornyn, who's been, I believe, catering to Donald Trump all year, all of a sudden come out and say that, hey, we're going to have a peaceful transition no matter what. He's contradicting Trump outright. Something is up. So Cornyn was worried. I would say that's a coin flip. We're going to be up all night watching that. It's going to be super close. And I think we're in for a lot of surprises. I'm excited to see how the Latino vote delivers, because I would disagree with Charles. Republicans are scrambling for any Latino support. They used to have a lot more Latino support when George Bush was president. They used to have in the 40s. Now it's dismal. So they're scraping by and hoping and praying. I think we're gonna have a lot of surprises.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot more to talk about, but we're going to take a little break here. So, Charles, I know he called you out. Please keep that in mind, because I'm going to come to you as well. We'll be right back with more discussion of the 2020 election. And while we're gone, you can stay up to date with the latest returns from local and national races. To the panel, right? Getting right back to our panel from What's Your Point? And let's pick up right where we left off. Tony Diaz called out Charles Blaine, saying that he expects the race between MJ Hagar and John Cornyn to shift toward MJ. Charles, what do you say?
Listen, I disagree with it. I think the issue is that MJ like a lot of Texas Democrats, have a problem with black voters. And we saw Royce West come out and say that he didn't even support her. They went against each other in the primary, and for him to not rally behind her now that she's the nominee says a lot. And I've talked to a lot of black Democrats who agree that they just can't support her. And so I think that is because that's the bread and butter of the Democratic Party. I think she's going to have a hard time winning without that support. And I just don't think she's going to get it.
Jackie, one thing that Tony mentioned is you couldn't escape the commercials, whether it was in this race or really so many other races. But let's stick with this one. MJ Hager ran on the idea primarily that she has the military background that she has, and that translates into what she would do in Washington. How much do you think that will resonate with voters versus what John Cornyn has, or in the minds of some, has not done for them over the last terms that he was in office?
Sure. John Cornyn is going to win this election. One of the things that he brings to the table that, frankly, our president does not is suburban women. John Cornyn is a moderate. And for many, many years, suburban women have been the stronghold in the Republican Party. And that's where you've seen a break from the president. Suburban women have broken from the president, but you're not seeing that break with John Cornyn. So that's why he will do well in his race. He will win his race. And as far as the dollars that are pouring in, yes, you have seen the DNC has determined that Texas is going to be a battleground state. And so they have poured in millions upon millions in many races. This is one of them. But this is one that they're not going to win.
So, Chris, this is not the only thing, the only race, obviously. Let's get to some of those congressional races. And let me start with Congressional District 22. That's Sri Kulkarni against Troy Nehls, the Democrat versus the Republican, trying to fill a seat being vacated by Pete Olson. Sri Kulkarni missed this seat by 5 points last go around. How much has he gained ground this time around versus what Troy Nehls has been able to do?
Well, Sri Kulkarni ran when Olson retired because Pete Olson retired because he figured this seat was going to flip Democrat. Fort Bend County flipped Democrat in the last presidential election, much to Jackie Valley's chagrin. It flipped Democrat, and everybody is expecting this seat to flip Democrat. And if the only way that Sri Kulkarni loses is if the people in the other counties come in hard, because Fort Bend County is going to vote Democrat this time again. And so if he can pull enough votes in Fort Bend County to carry this race, because he's not going to get the other counties. So if he can pull enough votes in Fort Bend County to carry the race, he's going to be the next representative. And that's where this battle comes, is in Fort Bend County. And I think Sri's probably got the edge, but he's got a strong competitor because the sheriff is, as Jackie said, very well liked and very well known. And he's a good guy. I know him very well. He's a good guy. And so he's got the name recognition to go out and run a hard campaign. And that has been one of the hardest fought campaigns in our area. And so it's going to be close. Sri's probably got the edge because Fort Bend County has gone to a Democratic voting county.
All right. Carmen Rowe, stand by. You are on deck for the next part of this conversation, but we want to stick with this idea of Fort Bend County. Here's a little non-confidential update for you. With 13,000 plus voters in by noon today in Fort Bend County, it's the first reported county in the state to surpass 70% turnout. It shatters previous records. With that in mind, one of the biggest congressional races playing out there, as we were just discussing. Let's pick it up with Fox 26's Ivory Hecker. More on the turnout and the race for Congressional District 22. Ivory.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be. Woo! Well, that may be closer than.
Yeah.
We are having trouble hearing Ivory, but when we can reestablish that, we will do that as well. So I'm going to ask if we're going to go back to the panel. Alyssa? Yes, let's do it. All right, Carmen Rowe, you are on deck as I promised. We're just coming a little sooner than anticipated. So One of the things that Chris was just talking about was how much energy Troy Nehls has been able to put into this race. He had a massive, just primary fight. He expended a bunch of his resources in that. Did he have enough to mount the kind of race against Sri Kulkarni that he needed to?
Well, I think if you believe the early votes, it shows that he's ahead in the numbers, not by a lot. I think this is going to be one of those that we're going to watch closely tonight. But yes, I mean, I think he has an incredible reputation in Fort Bend County and one that exceeds that area. I think he's somebody who, as Chris said, he's well known. He's well known for being a fantastic sheriff and somebody who's very passionate about his ideas. So I think he's a formidable opponent in this race, even though Fort Bend County is a blue area these days. Just like what Charles said, I think the rural people in the area are going to hopefully bring him over that line so that he can win that area. I don't think anybody knows more about it than he does, with all due respect to Sri. So we'll see what happens. But,
Pick me. I live there.
And that one after.
Well, Jackie, actually, I was going to come to you because I know you live there. And as we saw the previous race, this race, even if it doesn't go with Sri Kulkarni, it is trending in that direction. Tell people they're wrong.
So in his primary, because he was outspent so much, I mean, I believe his primary opponent spent the most ever in that type of race. Everyone outside of CD22 said, oh my goodness, is he in trouble? And he shattered it. He killed it. Look, the Nehls brothers, and particularly in this race, Troy Nehls, they have that type of ability that draws not only the hard R's, the moderates, but also the swings and independents. Because of their many, many years of service in law enforcement, in the military, years of being actively involved in the community. And that crosses all demographic. They have been actively involved with many South Asians, many Asians, many East Asians. So it's going to be very hard to defeat Troy Nehls. And then that coupled with the fact that you have the rural areas and Brazoria County, Troy Nehls is going to be the winner of CD22.
All right, let's get ourselves onto one of the other races here. This one not far from my backyard here. That is Congressional District 7, Lizzie Fletcher versus Wesley Hunt, who also is coming in with relying on his military background and saying he can take that to Washington as well. Tony, let me start with you and your thoughts.
Well, I want to say a little bit about the Nehls race. I've been to protests in Fort Bend because under Troy Nehls, the sheriff's department was caught profiling Latinos, and there were a lot of Latinos there, non-Latinos protesting Troy Nehls. What's also very disappointing is that Jackie mentioned his earlier campaign against Kathleen Wall. Kathleen Wall is not a fit opponent. She's blown $7 to I don't know how many millions of dollars in 2 races where she's scared to do any interviews. That's not Sri Kulkarni. Sri Kulkarni, he's running for the second time. He's got name recognition. He's got a machine running. I was happy to block walk for him. He's got national news, local news. And what I really like, too, is he would talk to the people. Troy Nehls tried to use the same tactics he used to beat Kathleen Wall. I think that was the wrong tactic. And let me just say this. What bothered me and offended me profoundly was that he would not sit down and talk to us about the racial profiling of Latinos. I think it's a tight race. I think he's going to lose. And I think that's part of it. I think he was not a very good candidate. He was very mediocre and ran a race that beat Kathleen Wall, not Tree.
Well, we will continue that conversation. That's why the voting happens. We'll see how that all gets counted. Panel, stand by. But I want to go back to Greg Grugan, our senior political reporter. He has been doing some digging since we last spoke with him. Greg, what do you got?
Hey, Tom, got some breaking news. Wanted to get it to you really quickly. Rice political analyst Mark Jones tells us, based on analysis of multiple races across the state, Republicans will retain control of the Texas House. As you might remember, Democrats needed to gain a net of 9 seats. Dr. Jones believes Democrats may gain a couple, but Republicans will retain control of the House and be able to choose their speaker, and that would leave the governorship the Senate and the House still in Republican control. That will be extremely disappointing for Democrats across the state who had some big ambitions about taking back the Texas House, particularly in time to be part of the redistricting process. So, Tom, I wanted to get that to you really quickly. The other news I saw out there, about 90% of the Florida vote is in, and President Trump is maintaining what looked to be about a 2-point lead, but it may be enough to hold up. That was a must-win state for him, as you and I have discussed. Tom?
Yeah, Greg, before you go, you talk about Mark Jones projecting, just analyzing, I would presume some sort of returns. Is he picking seats at this point on which ones he think will go which way or the other?
What he told me in our brief conversation was that Republicans are doing particularly well in the Metroplex area where many of the battleground seats were located. He said that the races are less solid here in the Houston area, but we'll get some more specifics later, and I'll get those to you.
All right, Greg, thank you very much. We'll bring the panel back in. And let's stick with this issue of what happens with the Texas House, because between the two parties, they identified almost 24 races between the two of them that they thought were in play. This news coming out of the Metroplex primarily that some of the in-play races are going to skew toward the Republicans. Let's bring that in because there are about 7 of those races here in the Houston area. Charles, your thoughts when you hear that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I am going to disagree and say that ours here in Harris County aren't as in flux as the ones in the Metroplex. I mean, we've seen some solid numbers coming out. It looks like Schofield and HD 132 might win that race back. He was the representative, and then he got ousted by Kalani, and now he might take that district back. Lacey Hull in House District 138 is up against Akila Basie by about 2.5 points. We've got Dennis Paul, Sam Harless with wide ranges. I think it looks really good for Harris County Republicans. I mean, and they worked very hard for this. They pumped a lot of money into these races. And so I know a lot of people want to talk about Harris County turning blue in terms of the Texas House districts and then the Texas House turning blue, but it looks like Harris County Republicans did a lot of work and it's paying off on election night.
So, Carmen, when you look at least, and my job tonight was to watch these 7 Houston area races. There are some open seats, there are rematches, and then there are some narrow victories that are being recontested again. And there is nothing, if we hear this, whether Charles is right or what we hear on the Metroplex is correct, it's not the kind of earth-shattering victory if it turns out that way. That's going to make for a very interesting time when Austin gets back to work.
Well, definitely. And I do think it's kind of shocking. I mean, for most people, if you watch the news and you're watching the numbers, you know, it seems like the Democrats poured so much money into this that we were destined to be blue here in Houston and destined perhaps to be a state that's blue. And so these numbers and this suggestion that that the Republicans may keep power, you know, is interesting and surprising to me anyway, because maybe I was believing too much of the hype. But you know, I think it's fascinating to see these numbers come in and to be different than what we thought they were. Again, focusing on the volume of voting this year, as well as the new voters and the young people that are voting. So I find it surprising.
Chris, if this holds true and if the Democrats are able to pick up a handful of the 9 seats they needed to get an outright majority in the House, at the very least, I would assume it's going to require the two sides of the aisle work together just a little bit more.
Well, the more seats the Democrats pick up, the more power they gain in the House. They won't have a majority, and so the Republicans are still going to hold control over the House, and they get to name the committee chairman, and that's really what holds the tide in any House. And so, while the Democrats will have more say because they won't have a solid majority in the House, as long as you get the Speaker of the House and you get to name, and the Speaker gets to name who the committee chairman are, that Speaker, he or she, still gets to hold all the power in the House, and that's really what the Democrats were aiming for, is to get control and name the Speaker, because that controls the agenda of the House. And when the Democrats get control of that, that will change the power of the government in Texas. That's what they were shooting for. And they didn't get that tonight, but the more they can etch away at that, the closer they get to it, the more that's what they're aiming for. But it didn't happen. It looks like it's not going to happen tonight.
And Tony, the big prize there, of course, is the ability to write the district lines, the congressional lines. And that's really what Democrats were looking forward to having the opportunity with the census figures to come in, district lines that would be set for the next 10 years.
That's huge because it shapes who wins elections. It shapes where money goes. And of course, as you mentioned, it shapes what's into the future. But let's get something clear. For me, the whole slogan, Turn Texas Blue, it's a slogan, right? It dismisses all the hard work that you have to do to deliver votes. And I think what's fascinating to me is that we've accepted this narrative where it's a chipping away at Republican power and an increase in the electorate. I think what happens is we got to go back to the table, whatever the outcomes tonight, because it ain't over, and then understand what it looks like in 2018 when Governor Abbott is up for election, because we got a lot of squeakers, just like the president does at the top of the ticket. Texas Republicans have to work hard for their lunch now, and I think that's good, and I think it's not going to stop.
Jackie, Tony brings up a thought that I had in my own mind, and let me echo that if indeed it plays out this way and Republicans are able to eke out a narrow victory in a lot of these races, how much do they recognize that that's a narrow victory indeed, and that it would be incumbent upon them to work a little bit more with the opposite side?
Well, first, let me clarify that a narrow victory is still a victory. So we won't be saying next year a narrow victory. We'll say that the Republicans are in control. Those of us who have our boots to the ground, our ears to the ground, we knew that turning over 9 seats was not going to happen in 2020. And it looks like Dr. Jones is predicting that. Now, with all of that said, one thing I would like to say about our legislature in Texas, our Democrats and Republicans work a lot better than you see the people in DC. And so a lot of the turmoil and a lot of the conflict and the stress that you see at the national level, you don't see in Austin. And I suspect that even though we will retain the majority, we will continue to reach across the aisle and work with Democrats, because we realize that there are Republicans and Democrats in our state, and we want to make sure we represent everyone. So I've been saying, I said this morning when I was on air, that I did suspect, even no matter how the national race goes, that we would continue to be the majority. And I'm glad to see that that's what Dr. Jones and others are predicting as well.
So, Charles, let me bring you in on that. The margin of, I guess, control is getting narrower and narrower. Jackie says that Democrats and Republicans work well in Austin. Republicans have got to recognize, though, that they are losing these seats.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent, yeah. So it looks like we're going to one of the seats that we're going to lose, which is shocking, is House District 134, right? And that's Sarah Davis, who has more so than any Republican in the Texas House worked with Democrats. So I think it goes to show that even if you are going to give in to some Democratic concessions, it's not always going to work for you in your district. And so I don't think that message necessarily carries through. I think it really comes to campaigning and make sure you have folks that fit the district. I think Republicans need to do a better job when it comes to campaigning and when it comes to connecting with constituents in their districts. But I don't think that, conceding to Democrats because we're losing marginal control is what needs to be done. Because I think, if Sarah Davis does not pull off a victory tonight, that really goes to show that no matter how much you concede to Democrats on issues, if they don't want you in there, they're not going to support you during election time. She has typically received a ton of support from Democrats, but this time around, she's got a formidable opponent, and they, kind of just turned their backs on her when she needed them most. And so I'm hesitant to say that they're going to concede too much to Democrats next session. I think they need to hold on to what they ran on and deliver on that, and that's what constituents are going to be looking for.
Well, we all want to count all of those votes too, and make sure that these trends go the way we think they will versus perhaps a surprise. So, panel, stand by. We want to go back to Greg Grugan. He is in the newsroom. He has been compiling the latest on a national view where the East Coast is counting votes already. Greg.
As quickly as possible. I've been monitoring the New York Times website. It's highly regarded. In the battleground state of Florida, with 90% of the vote in, President Trump has 50.5% of the vote thus far. Former Vice President Biden with 48.4%, 10% of the vote still out. Close, but I spoke to Mark Jones earlier, and he said that it looks like Trump will likely hold on in Florida. That is a must-win state. Here in the Lone Star State of Texas, also listed as a battleground, Joe Biden is leading 50.4% of the vote. President Trump, 48.3%. That is with 47% of the vote in, according to the New York Times. When I looked at the map, the Biden numbers, or the numbers in so far, included many of the metropolitan areas. As we know, rural Texas tends to vote heavily for the Republican cause, and particularly this president. So it appears to me a good chance that the president can make up some ground, and that could be a very close race. I was looking at North Carolina as well, with about 60% of the vote in. Former Vice President Biden, the Democrat, is leading 53.1% to the president's 45.8%, but still lots of votes out. Wanted to get those numbers hot off the press to you. We will continue to monitor and get back with you. Tom?
And Greg, before you go, I want to expand on something that you just mentioned, because we were both there in the newsroom in 2016 when the early votes came in, and they looked very strong for Hillary Clinton then, and then the complexion of the results changed, obviously, through the course of the evening. That is still very likely to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, they have the Texas map. By counties, you can see that Harris County is in, Dallas County is in, Travis County, where Austin is in. But much of the rural part of our state, the many sparsely populated counties, the country, so to speak, they are not in. Neither is El Paso. Neither is the Rio Grande Valley, which are expected to be Biden strongholds. So it may be a long night here as we monitor the Texas vote.
Texas and every other state in the union until they get all of them counted as well. As I'm watching the Fox News channel here off to the side and seeing some of the numbers come through. So Kansas, for example, with 33%, and they're showing a very tight race. But as that remaining 67% comes in, then the numbers obviously change as well. Alyssa, we're going to go back to the panel. Let me know. All right, let's bring them in. All right, so, ladies and gentlemen, let's turn to Congressional District number 2. That's Dan Crenshaw and Seema Lajavardian. A lot of money spent on that, and it is likely to go, if I look at the early returns, toward Mr. Crenshaw and staying in office. Chris, let's start with you. Your thoughts?
Oh, I don't see how Dan Crenshaw loses that race. That was gerrymandered to be a Republican stronghold. Dan Crenshaw has got a national name. His Saturday Night Live performance was brilliant. I just don't see any way he loses that race. He's gonna be reelected, and he did a lot to help the other Republicans running in the Harris County area and tried to buoy them up. But I don't know if that helped. But he's going to be reelected.
Tony, was Dan Crenshaw kind of the the big dog amongst the Republican congressional delegation here in the Houston area?
Well, he had the advantage of being the incumbent, and like Chris said, he'd got national attention. I also think what's very interesting about that campaign is how much money went into it. Additionally, it overlaps a lot of these other races, including Hull versus Akila Basie is in that area. You also have an interesting a county commissioner's race, Michael Moore versus Ramsey in that area. So I think it's not just that race. It's interesting to see what the fallout is in that whole area, and just to see what's going to happen there. But obviously, because he is the incumbent, he had an advantage. But Seema's a very strong candidate. First time she ran, so I want to wait till we see the numbers. But I'd also give Dan, a little wake up call in that here's a newcomer. Let's see how close she came. And, I'm not going to count my kitchen. He shouldn't count his chickens before they're hatched. And I think we got to pay attention to that area in the future.
Jackie, let me ask you this question here, because there are a lot of candidates who are coming around a second time, a third time. And which is the Democratic candidate you think is the strongest of them that you think the Republicans ought to probably watch out for him or her?
Well, currently running, I'm assuming you're asking which of the congressional candidates on the Democrat side that's currently running. That's Lizzie Fletcher. She had Nancy Pelosi behind her. She had the DNC machine behind her. The young man running against her, he has a nice resume, but he really hasn't done much in politics. She's a seasoned politician at this point. This is her second time around. And, she speaks well, she presents well. So I believe if you look at all the Democrats, she would probably be one of the strongest who's currently running, and you'll see that reflected in her race. On the Republican side, I want to echo what's being said about Dan Crenshaw. Let's not forget, he got national attention because liberals made fun of him because he was injured while at duty protecting us and being at war. So let's not forget that, okay? That's why he got national attention. He's also extremely smart, Harvard grad. He's also very shrewd, and he knows how to campaign. So Dan Crenshaw is going to be there for a long time, not for some of the reasons that have been listed, but for a lot of good reasons.
Carmen, you want to expound on that? As we look at these results, Crenshaw with 56% of the vote, showing 56% to Seema Lajavardian, 43% with almost the entire results in at 99%.
I mean, Dan Crenshaw, best campaign ad, period. I think everybody loves him. He's got a great name, and for all the reasons Jackie said, he's earned it in war and in his position, in politics. And I think that he's a leader among, a lot of men and women. And so I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon. And I think his star will continue to rise.
Panel, we started talking earlier before we got some results that we had to turn to about Congressional District 7, and Jackie brings it up, Lizzie Fletcher. She's looking like she is going to retain that seat against Wesley Hunt. There was a time when polls showed them very, very close. What do you suppose the difference was that allowed them to pull apart? Charles?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Lizzie, I think she did a really good job of selling herself as a moderate that was independent of the Democratic machine. And, I think if we had heard the rhetoric about what the Democrats want to do to the oil and gas industry earlier during this cycle, that might have reflected more in this race. I think we heard it so late, people had already started voting, that it didn't play a huge role. But I do still think there's a chance for Wesley. I mean, I think we're looking at early voting and mail-in. I'm not sure that we have a ton of election day numbers in yet. And so I think he still has a good shot. He raised a ton of money. I think he had wide support from not just across the district, but across the country. Dan Crenshaw lent his name ID and his kind of campaign apparatus to really boost Wesley, as well as so many other candidates, Lacey Hall in 138, and so many others up and down the ballot. So, I'm still holding out for him, and I think he has a good shot. But if there is one thing, I think it's Lizzie's ability to differentiate herself from other Democrats and not get kind of caught up in that rhetoric of being, that far left-leaning progressive type that we've come to see on TV.
Carmen, how astounded have you been seeing the money that has rolled through? I'm sure the sales office of TV stations and newspapers and radio stations have been pleased by it, but man, tens and tens of millions of dollars for state seats, these congressional seats, and of course the presidency as well.
It used to be, kind of the wrong thing to say that you could buy votes, but that's exactly what we're doing. We buy them through influence and persuasion and TV ads and, millions of dollars put into finding ways to reach people and to get them invested in something that may or may not even be real. Honestly, I think it's a sad state of affairs that you can buy votes, that you can buy positions of power in politics today. Hopefully we're going to get better management on that in the future, but there's no question that this year, from the presidential race all the way down to local races, there has been an incredible amount of money and campaigning like we've never seen. And it's, I'd say it's obnoxious, but it's powerful and it works. And the question is whether or not, it works so well that we're bringing people into our leadership, and whether or not those are the right people because they were able to get that much money and put together those great campaigns.
You wonder how well served the electorate is learning out who these people are really, or whether they get a kind of a sales job of some sort. All right, panel, stand by. We're going to take a little bit of break here. We're going to allow folks to see some results as we have gotten them into the Fox 26 newsroom. We'll be back in just a few moments. Welcome back to our digital coverage on Fox26Houston.com of Election Night 2020. Want to go to the station now. Lena DeFlorius is standing by, where she's counting out the different permutations of how the presidential candidates get to 270 electoral votes tonight. Lena.
Yeah, good night or good evening and welcome to it. You know what? Okay, this race is said to start in Florida, end in Pennsylvania if things are close. I want you to take a look at the map. This is the latest vote tally for the Electoral College. Right now, of the 17 states that have already been called, there are no surprises here. This is exactly the way the map was shaping up in 2016. If I'm working for the Trump campaign, I'm very happy with this because Trump walked away with 306 electoral votes in 2016. I do want to point a couple things out to you. Maine right here, you see only half of the state has been declared. Nebraska, none of the state, but these are not winner-take-all states. They go by congressional district. That's why you're seeing maybe there'll be one electoral vote added to one of the tallies. I want to compare this to 2016. Again, no surprises in what we've seen so far. These are not your battleground states. Everything that has been called is going along as expected. There are no surprises here. Your battleground states are going to be Arizona, which did vote for President Trump in 2016. Very close to turning blue is what a lot of people are expecting. People are saying Texas, I'm going to call it competitive. I'm not going to call that a swing state, a battleground state. Not ready for that at this point. But here are your battlegrounds. Florida, 29 electoral votes. A president, Republican, has not won without the state of Florida since 1924. And if you look back over the last 100 years, that is 25 elections, Florida's only gotten it wrong 4 times. Georgia is now a battleground state. They also have 2 Senate seats up because of a special election. So this is a state to watch as well. Also, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota. You add those together, you have 134 electoral votes. That's half of what you need to get to 270. Minnesota, I find very intriguing, and here's why. This has been a bastion for Democrats for the last at least 44 years. They have always voted blue. They voted blue in 2016. They voted blue in 1980, 1984. They voted for Dukakis. They voted for Mondale. This is the only state in the union that voted against Reagan in 1984. Very interesting that both candidates spent one of their final days of campaigning in Minnesota. So that is one to watch. Guys, if we do have the 2016 map, I'd like to compare that to show people what it looked like. We can go back to the other graphic. That's okay. All right. So when we're taking a look at how this can play out, it really does start with the state of Florida, depending on who wins Florida. Now, let's say that Biden wins Florida. Well, then he is very close to the 38 electoral votes that he'll need to push him over 270. That's assuming that all the other states play the same game that they did in 2016. Again, your battleground states are where this is focused. Like Washington votes the same. Nevada usually votes the same. You always see California go blue after the 1980s. You always see New York do the same. We also always see Texas and Louisiana going blue, going red rather, Texas voting Republican ever since 1976. So there are some states that you can pretty much bank and count on. It's those other battleground states that we're watching to see if they flip or if they repeat what we saw in 2016. Now you might be thinking, all right, I've got my calculator out. I'm not really sure where this is going here. I do have something for you if you're interested in how to break down the Electoral College. You wonder where these numbers come from. I can tell you that they're based on population. You have something within, I'm going to say 1 to 2 feet of you that can break this all down for you. 538 electoral votes, 270 to win. You're going to hear that all night long. But where do they come from? We talked about the House of Representatives. If you have your calculator with you on your phone, bring it up right now. 435 representatives. You put that number in your phone, you add 100. We have 2 senators and 2 electoral votes assigned to each state, no matter population, no matter the size. Add those together, you should get 538, but you don't. You get 535. Where do the other 3 come from? Am I bad at math? No. District of Columbia. It is not a state, so it does not have any senators. It's not a congressional district, so it does not have any representatives. But it is a district, and Americans do live there. You add the number 3, there you go. Your 538 electoral votes that will decide the presidency tonight.
All right, we are continuing to count the votes here in Texas. At last check, 14% of precincts statewide have been reported, with President Trump carrying 50% of the vote, just under 20 million votes to former Vice President Joe Biden's 49%, just a little more than 19 million votes. And with that in mind, we now have Rice University political science professor and one of our favorite voices during times like this, Mark Jones. Glad to have you back with us. Mark, there's a lot to unpack here.
Right.
Let's start with those, first of all, the Texas numbers. Very, very tight, largely what we would have anticipated, I imagine.
Right, it's tight, but it's good news for President Trump in that we knew that the early vote was going to lean Democratic, but even with the early vote, the president's slightly ahead. Once the election day numbers come in, we're going to see the president increase his lead over Joe Biden, and then we'll also see some of the more rural counties that take a while to report also coming in. So I think the president's in good shape to win in Texas, and I think statewide all the Republicans are going to win. So the Democratic losing streak or Republican winning streak that dates back to 1996 is likely to continue this cycle.
Let's stay in Texas for a moment, Mark. And we talked to Greg Rugen just a little bit ago, and he had cited some analysis that you had done about the status and the outcome of the various races for the Texas House, all 150 seats in play, slightly fewer than 24 of them really considered competitive. And you're saying that the Democrats will not take control of the House, in your opinion. Why?
No, based on the early vote, Democrats needed to be up in the 2 seats here in Houston, Gina Kalani's seat and John Rosenthal's seat. Those are 2 that they're defending. Kalani is down to Mike Schofield, and Rosenthal is just slightly ahead of Justin Ray. The early vote, I think, is probably going to put Schofield over the top and may put Ray over the top. Another top target that Democrats had to flip was the seat 138, where Akila Basie, the Democrat, was facing Lacey Hull, the Republican. Hull is also up in the early vote. And another potentially weak Republican, didn't turn out to be weak at all, that's Sam Harless. He's well ahead. The only real Republican loss thus far in Harris County looks to be Sarah Davis in District 134, who's probably going to be defeated by Ann Johnson. But in the least, and if we go up to Collin County and Tarrant County and Dallas County, where Democrats needed to flip multiple seats, right now they're only ahead in a couple of them. So it does look like Democrats will have a net gain of House seats, but they need to get 8 to tie and 9 to win. And I don't think they're going to get up to 8 at all. It's probably going to be somewhere maybe in the 2, 3, 4 range.
You know, Mark, I want to ask you one final question before I get back to the panel here. And we talked about it with them, about if the Democrats are able to narrow the margin of, I guess, deficit to the Republicans in the State House, how likely is it that there is more bipartisanship across the aisle between those 2 sides?
Well, yeah, the one outcome, whether the Democrats have taken control or the Republicans retain control, is that we are going to have a more moderate, more centrist, more bipartisan House that's going to clash probably with the Texas Senate that's going to continue to be very conservative under the leadership of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. So I think we are going to see a House that's going to be governed from the center. Looks increasingly it's going to be from the center right, but it's not going to be from the more further right, which is where the Texas Senate is today.
All right, Mark Jones there at the station. Thank you very much. We'll check in a little bit later as the numbers kind of grow and evolve. It's an organic creature tonight. With that in mind, let's get back to the panel and talk about that, because, panel, you've had an opportunity to see those numbers here in Texas, those early returns, 14% reporting, with 50% of the vote going to President Trump, 49% going to former Vice President Biden. But these other states that are marginally returning their own votes, and you're seeing some trends. I want to know what surprises you versus what you expected. And let me start with you, Charles.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to what I said before. I think what's surprising me, and I know Tony's going to push back against this, is how Hispanics are turning out to vote. In Miami, we saw a 200,000 vote increase for Trump from 2016 to now. Numbers coming in now from Cameron County on the border, Brownsville, Harlingen, South Texas. Biden is winning by 12%. Hillary won by 32%. Webb County, also out there, Laredo. He's underperforming Hillary and underperforming what Beto did. So I think we're really starting to see a shift there. You know, we talk a lot about the rhetoric and how people find it offensive, but I think something is resonating with people where he's underperforming what Hillary did and what Beto did. And to say that's a big task. I mean, Beto had a wave, and so it's quite interesting to see for me.
Jackie, are you surprised by any numbers that you're seeing?
No, I'm not. I mean, even Biden himself said that Latinos are a different animal, right? Didn't he say that Latinos, they think independently and they don't necessarily fall in line like African Americans? I hope African Americans are listening to how little Joe Biden thinks of them, but I digress. So yeah, even Joe Biden suspected that Latinos were not going to fall in line and just vote for him. And especially the Latinos in Florida, where you see the president has a slight lead. And I suspect that he will continue to have that lead, same as he won in Florida in 2016. The Latinos in Florida, those are Latinos from the Caribbean, like where I'm from. And so a lot of the Latinos there are more conservative. And that's what Joe Biden was fearful of. And that's why he pivoted to the right and said, well, looks like I'll have to really dig in and try to make sure I turn out a very large African-American crowd.
Tony, when you look at how the two campaigns came to Texas or didn't come to Texas, we saw Kamala Harris here last week. She made a kind of a tour through the state, but there has not been a lot of Donald Trump, Joe Biden presence in this state, despite the talk of this being a battleground state and much closer than it had been in the past. Do you think either of the campaigns overlooked Texas and took it for granted?
Well, let's stay on the whole issue of the Latino demographic. At the end of the day, one quick metaphor. No one would say, hey, Trump got the white vote. No, they're going to say, hey, white, suburban, college-educated women. Until we're that sophisticated with the Latino demographic, everything else is a bunch of stereotypes, mostly from the 70s. So that's one important thing. The other thing I'm going to add, it's like we said earlier, we're talking about throwing a lot of money at Texas. Listen, we brought up the name Kathleen Wall, and she paid $14 million for races she didn't win. She couldn't buy the votes. Let me say her name one more time, Kathleen Wall. She dumped a ton of money at a race. She wasn't a good candidate. She avoided people. She didn't win. What I would say is that, kind of like you alluded to, if Texas is really in play, don't just keep saying turn Texas blue. Spend the money, visit the state, additionally invest long-term, and then invest on the ground. TV ads are just an aerial assault. Again, Lizzie Fletcher's a fantastic candidate, not just with TV ads. She does the retail campaigning. She's smart. So you got to have all those things in action as well. That's what I would say for the Latino demographic, and additionally for investing truly in Texas. Now, having said that, I'm talking about 2022 to really give Governor Abbott a run for his money. That's what I'm talking about right now. I'm going to say that there's been successes up and down their ballot so far. Proud of the Democrats stepping up. I like that their game has increased. Let's see what else is in store for us.
Are you throwing up the white flag right now? Is that what I'm hearing you?
No, I threw up the Mexican flag and the Texas flag. That's what I threw up.
Right.
No
Fair
surrender.
enough. Fair enough. Chris, I saw you making faces as he was talking. What's on your mind?
Well, look, Texas has been ready to go for a very long time. And the Democrats have ignored Texas because they've ceded Texas to the Republicans for too long. Donald Trump ignored Texas. He said, I've got Texas, I'm going to win Texas. He didn't come here. And the Democrats, if they'd have come here, they were begging Joe Biden to come here and campaign, and he wouldn't do it. He was focused on Pennsylvania and Florida, and that's fair. But you can't win Texas if you're not going to come here. And he didn't even run a campaign ad until 8 days before the election. And so you're not going to win this state if you don't focus on it. And that's why if he loses Texas, it's because the Democrats did not do what needed to be done to come down here and win the state. It's just that simple. They didn't focus on it, and they did cede Texas to Donald Trump, period.
Carmen, we're looking at numbers there now. 18% of the precincts reporting in the state, and the gulf between President Trump and Joe Biden is widening, 51 to 48%. Let me ask you to chime in on this conversation. Did these campaigns overlook Texas and take the dynamics for granted, or just assume it was going to be the same old, same old?
I mean, I don't think there's any question they overlooked it. And the fact that everybody is debating whether or not we're going to go red or blue tells you how close the numbers are likely to be. And so in that situation, it could have been either one of their games if they'd done more, which they did so little. I do think that the Democrats did a lot to pour a lot of money into Texas, but as Tony pointed out, that's not enough. And so, I think that they didn't take it for granted to the extent they put a lot of money into it. I think Trump took it for granted because I think ultimately we will turn out to be red. But the fact that it's as close as it is, it's surprising that they spent so little time here.
All right. With that said, I was just talking to my producer, and our numbers are not jiving with what Fox News is presenting. Fox News is suggesting much more of the returns are in and a much closer race than that. So this talk about going one way or the other may be premature. Again, that's why they count all the votes and why we've had that discussion as well. Speaking of counting the votes and the expectation of how tonight will end versus waiting till tomorrow, waiting a week from now, or back when it was Bush v. Gore and we were in December before there was finally a decision. Let me take your gut check on how this will go. Jackie, let me start with you. Do we know tonight? Do we know this week? Do we know in a month?
It was like I said this morning, it's going to be a very long night. A lot of, almost every poll showed the president was going to be behind his opponent by 8 to 10 points. And I knew that was not true. They said very comparable things in 2016 when he ran against Hillary. And frankly, he's running against the same people. He's running again against the Clintons and the Obamas. But so every state, like the states like Texas and like Florida, it's going to be a lot closer than people on the right or people on the left suspected. It's going to be a very long night. I suspect we really won't know tonight because even if there is a declared winner, there will be lawsuits. Joe Biden hired 15 lawyers and Hillary Clinton told him, do not give up no matter what. So he's in for a fight. So it will be a long time, a long process before we actually find out who will be sitting in that White House.
All right. Look at the rest of you. Chime in there. And who wants to take Jackie to task there?
I will.
Go ahead.
Suggest that Joe Biden's going to be the one to file the lawsuits when the president's been talking about it for 4 years is astounding. But look, the hanging chad of this election is signatures on the mail-in ballots. And if we're going to have lawsuits, it's going to be over contest over if the signature on the mail-in ballot matches the signature on the applications. And that's where this, if there's going to be contest, that's what this is going to be all about. And in the battleground states, that's where the challenges are going to lie. And we're going to have to wait and see. If if President Trump or Joe Biden take enough states and has enough of a mandate, then there won't be enough room for a challenge. If this is as close as Jackie says it's going to be, then there'll be a challenge in those battleground states over those signatures, and that's where we'll end up in the courts. And it could go all the way into December, just like it did in Bush versus Gore, and end up maybe at the Supreme Court, and we'll have one of those battles just again, just like we did last time.
I would like to add something. Well, Republicans need to slow their roll because they can talk smack, but you're in Harris County, which is bluer than ever. We just ran off one of the Republicans that, in my opinion, was extreme anyway because she voted for the Show Me Your Papers law. But I think something also very important. You're in Harris County where the Republicans were trying to throw out 127,000 votes that were submitted by drive-through. So yeah, like Chris was saying, if anyone is bringing lawyers for frivolous lawsuits, it's Republicans, and they've been announcing it at the national level. We've seen it under our very eyes because even after one federal court said, yo, let the ticket stand, Republicans continued this farce.
Well, we will see after the various and sundry parties across the country say they are done counting. All right, panel, stand by. We are going to take a little break. We're going to show you some results as we know them, scrolling across your computer screen, and we'll be back in a few minutes for this digital version of election night coverage on Fox26Houston.com. Welcome back to our digital coverage of Election Night 2020 on Fox26Houston.com. I'm Tom Ziska. Glad to have you with us. We want to turn to Rice University political professor Mark Jones, one of our great observers, political-wise, here in Houston. Mark, we're going to talk about, I guess, the status of Texas in this race, and I'm looking at Fox News right now, and with their reporting, with 62% of the precincts reporting, Mr. Biden has basically 0.7% lead over President Trump. You think the state will fall toward President Trump? Tell me about it.
Oh, I'm sorry, my mask on. Yes, I mean, I think that's definitely the case in that we're in a situation where once the rural votes come in, and then once the election day vote comes in, we're going to see the president's lead increase. And so for Biden to have won Texas, he needed to rack up a much larger majority in the early vote.
So to help understand this, Mark, Texas had more people early vote than all the people who voted in 2016. So these votes that are in now are really those early votes. So it's those who went to the ballot and the polls today, rather to cast their ballot, that have yet to be counted, including those rural areas that traditionally skew toward Republicans. Is that what we're to take from that?
Right. And so the rural areas, they tend to vote early less than people in metro areas. And then they also tend to get their results in late because their technology is a little further behind that which we have in the urban counties. As a result, once those results start rolling in, and once we see the election day results come in from Harris County and Montgomery County and Brazoria County, those should favor the president. So what we'll see as the night goes on is Trump's lead over Biden will become larger and larger. I don't know if it's going to get to 5 points, but it certainly is going to move in the president's direction rather than the former vice president's direction.
Mm-hmm. Mark, this is something I talked about with Greg Rugen a little bit earlier, and you were there at the newsroom as well back in 2016, and we watched these returns start coming in early. They skewed early toward Secretary Hillary Clinton in her race for the president, and then they kind of organically morphed through the night. That's what we should expect to see, depending on which way it goes ultimately. But the numbers we see now are not the numbers and the percentages that we'll see later on, or when this is all said and done.
No, they'll slowly continue to go towards the president and towards probably leaning Republican. And this year, more people voted early than in 2016. So a larger proportion of our votes are already in the bank, and they've already been counted. The election day percentage will be somewhere between probably 18 and 25% of the overall vote, so a relatively small fraction compared to back in 2016. So we're looking at a situation where a lot of the vote's already in, and then the election day vote, if all indicators are correct, should lean more Republican, in part because more Republicans waited until election day to vote.
Mm-hmm. Something we talked about with the panel, Mark, was whether or not these campaigns overlooked Texas. We saw Kamala Harris here last week. She made a barnstorming swing through the state, but we didn't see a whole lot of Joe Biden. We didn't see a whole lot of Donald Trump. Did they take Texas for granted and just expect that it would be continuing the way it always did?
Well, I think more than anything else, for the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign, Texas was not going to be a pivotal state. For Trump, if he was losing in Texas, then he's lost the election in other states, and so it wasn't worth his time or effort. And it's the same for Biden. Biden's route to victory did not go through Texas. It went through states like Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And then to a lesser extent, Georgia and Arizona. That's where he needed to spend his time and effort. So really, I think the campaigns ignored Texas because while Texas is an important state, it would have been gravy for Biden had he won, and for Trump had he lost it. He would have been out of the running already earlier, because if you're losing Texas for Donald Trump, you've already lost states like Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. And the fact that the president's up in Florida, as the vote increasingly comes in, it's just a signal that he's also going to be up here in Texas as well.
You bring in some of these other states, Mark, and I'm looking at results as they're counted on Fox News right now. In Florida, with 91% of the precincts reporting, President Trump has 51.3% of the vote. But Georgia is skewing toward the president. South Carolina is. Michigan is. Wisconsin, although ever so slightly in those last two. North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Minnesota skewing toward Joe Biden. There's a mix of electoral votes there and different, I guess, equations that could get either one of those men to 270.
Right, and I think it does mean we're probably going to have a long wait because states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and to a lesser extent Ohio and Wisconsin are going to take a longer amount of time to actually count their ballots. And therefore we may not know the full result of this race, especially with the president winning, it seems, in Florida until perhaps Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday.
All right, Mark Jones, thank you very much. I know you've got your ear to the ground. We'll check in when there is more story to tell, more analysis to offer. Meantime, let's bring it back into the panel here. And panel, when we talked, those numbers that we thought we were looking at in Texas from Fox News, 63. I'm looking off the screen here. 63% of the precincts reporting statewide. President Trump with 49.1%. Vice President Joe Biden with 49.6%. 0.5% is dividing these two, with most of the rural counties, typically Republican-leaning counties, according to Mark Jones, yet to kind of weigh in. So, Tony, are you nervous about Texas?
Well, I just took a screenshot of that of that moment, and I'm going to preserve that to keep us fighting because. Let's get something straight. Right. If the electoral map looked the same as 2016, and Texas was the only state that Joe Biden flipped, not only would he win, we'd have Democratic presidents for generations to come. So that is a huge prize. It will not go easily. And again, I'm not going to count any. Republicans shouldn't count their. Don't count your. I hate cliches. I'm not going to use the cliche. How about this? we gotta wait for the numbers to come in, and I think the other part too is that let's get to the real work. I'm more interested in how many activists we've created, how many young Latino voters are now reliable voters because they voted early, and I don't think you're going to have the same Texas you had because Dan Patrick's style is not going to work anymore.
Well, while we listened to Tony talk, then we're now 64% precincts, and President Trump has a 0.1% lead in the state of Texas, perhaps suggesting that those later returns, Jackie, might skew toward the president.
Well, that's what we've seen traditionally for the last couple of decades. The rural areas have leaned towards the Republican. The rural areas, particularly for this president, he is very popular in those areas, and it takes them longer to get their votes in. We saw that in 2016. We saw that in 2018. A lot of Republican candidates, they started out with a much lower percentage, and as the rural areas and other areas outside of the larger urban areas started to get their votes in, then you saw the lead of the Republican candidate to expand it. Again, I concur with everything that Mark said. The president will hold on to his lead. That lead will expand as more of the votes come in.
Some of these other states, though, kind of problematic, though, for president. If you look at the electoral map, and the math as well. I'm looking at Fox's map: Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Minnesota, all skewing toward Joe Biden. Chris Tritico, is this winnable in your gut for President Trump or for Joe Biden?
Well, it's pretty early, but look, North Carolina. I'm looking at the Wall Street Journal and New York Times live map, and they've got North Carolina 80% of the vote, Biden up 1.8%. 80% of the vote, that's a pretty high number there. And so Biden may hold on to that. Ohio, 60% of the vote, Biden up 3%. In Pennsylvania, 19% of the vote with Biden up 22%. And you get those 3 states, and it's pretty hard for Donald Trump to come back, even if he gets Florida. And so with those 3 states, and with what we know Biden is going to get on the western side of the country, if he gets those 3 states, I think he wins. If he holds on to those 3 states, he can lose Florida and Texas. And so those 3 states alone makes it pretty hard for Donald Trump to hold on to the presidency. But it's early, especially in Pennsylvania, with only 19% of the vote counted. That 21% lead can be etched away because that's just early voting, and we'll have to see.
All right, panel, I'm going to leave you there. I'm going to leave you with this.
Everything's all good?
To chew on. Because when we come back, I want to talk about whether or not we keep the Electoral College or not. And let's talk on that conversation, because that's been a point of contention amongst a lot of people since 2016 and before that as well. So panel will be back. Meantime, I want to go to Natalie He. She's outside NRG Stadium, Energy Park, where they are counting the votes tonight in Harris County. Natalie?
Hey there, Tom. A pretty cool setup here. I want to show you what we're looking at here. Right here, you see these white tents. There are 16 lanes of them. All 806 polling locations will be dropping off your ballots right here. You can see the runners go up to each of these cars. They're taking the actual polling data, and they're going to be bringing it into inside NRG Arena. You can see here some of the runners right now rolling through. You can see some of them coming back out. They've been making these rounds all through the evening. As soon as the polls closed at 7 o'clock, we were just standing by waiting to see how soon these election judges would be dropping off their ballot boxes. So a pretty neat setup here, Tom. You can see the number of cars that are just rolling in, and right now we are at 8:30, I believe, right? Just a little bit past the half hour, 8:35. So we've seen so many of these election judges drop off their ballot boxes and bring it all the way through NRG Arena. Now, once they go inside NRG Arena, we do have our colleague Matthew Seedorf, who's been in there for most of the day today. They drop it off through Hall A over there. They classify the ballots, and then they actually bring it over across the building to where they do the actual ballot counting. So a lot of movement here tonight, a lot of things to keep tabs on, and so it's pretty neat to see how fast and how efficient this is scrolling by as well too. You can see the runners just going in and out, dropping it. They have quite the system here, Tom. So pretty neat stuff. We'll be keeping track of all this stuff over here, and of course this is also where Harris County Clerk Chris Hollins is giving his updates as well. We just heard from him not that long ago. He said they had no issues at the polls today, and we've also seen Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Ling come here to speak as well. So a lot of cool stuff to keep track on, and we'll be keeping you updated here all night. Tom, back to you.
So Natalie, this is a big change from the 2018 election cycle here in Harris County when a different reporting system was put in use, and we didn't get any returns for hours and hours on into the next day. It appears to be going a lot more smoothly this time around.
Yeah, it certainly has. I think they've certainly learned from everything that happened in 2018 and even through the runoffs. And Harris County Clerk Chris Hollins certainly says that they put a lot of thought, a lot of planning into here. Obviously, he is new. He's an interim clerk, but he certainly has put a lot of thought into it, and they certainly tried to work out those kinks as much as possible, and they're trying to get this to run as smoothly as possible tonight, Tom. And so far, it looks like it is. And as you can see, like I said, the system that they have running here is so efficient. They're running in and out. And of course, a lot of this also has to do with the COVID-19 pandemic. The runners, everything is kind of keeping everyone safe and healthy and hoping for a very smooth election here tonight.
Who you voted for. It's nice to see democracy working that way. Natalie He at Energy Park. Thank you very much, Natalie. As we turn back to the panel there, I want to note here from Fox News, 64% of Texas precincts reporting. President Trump with 49.5% of the vote. Vice President Joe Biden, 49.2%. So President Trump with a narrow 0.3 of a point lead. Panel, let's talk about the future of the Electoral College and whether or not it's something that we should have. It's codified in in the paperwork that makes this country what it is. It would take literally an act of Congress and a bunch of positive votes from the populace to change it. But is it something that we should do? Should we just go to a popular vote and let it be at that? Carmen, let me start with you.
The Electoral College has been around forever. It's part of the stability that is our political system, and it's part of our Constitution. In all but 4 races, including 2016, it represents the majority or popular vote in 90% of the elections that have come down. And so, I think that it's the best way to maintain stability and not to get into fighting over individual votes, which I think we would do. And I think that it would no longer represent the type of government that we, as the founders, put together in our Constitution. And so I think we have to keep it, to keep some stability in our political system.
Charles, there is a loud chorus of voices that says popular vote would be much stronger and that this winner-take-all electoral college invites the kind of problems that we had in 2016 when the Electoral College chose not the popular vote winner, but rather, the one who got fewer votes.
Yeah, and I think because of that loud chorus is the reason that we do need to keep it, so that we don't have our institutions swayed by just the changes and, and kind of mentality and positions of the general populace. I mean, I think once you change that, you kind of open up questions about, should we elect senators the same way? They represent our states rather than individual people. It's almost kind of a similar institution. But I think the bigger issue is that it encourages national campaigns. People have to campaign at this kind of state level rather than campaign just to New York, LA, Chicago, Philadelphia, Houston, and kind of these major population hubs. They really have to speak to people across the country and reassure them that they're running to represent them and represent their needs rather than focused on just major population hubs. So I just don't see I haven't been convinced that it's necessary to be changed.
Tony, what are we to make of the, and as soon as I bring it up, I can't remember the name of it, but it's this ad hoc agreement by a number of states. I want to say maybe 24 states where they have suggested that they would apportion their electoral votes based on the popular vote. So if 51% vote for one candidate, they get 51% of the electoral votes and vice versa. What are we to make of that, and is that perhaps something that might get some larger traction?
Well, it's complicated and it's not the official law. And one of the big arguments for the Electoral College is that, let's look at early voting. So let's just round it, 100 million early votes. If you add the early votes of Texas, which was about 9 million-ish, and then California, about 10 million-ish, 20% of the early vote were those 2 states. The theory is that then someone campaigns and just hits the biggest states to deliver the biggest amount of votes. My main consideration is that argument is a red herring. To me, good progressives evaluate how the entire system isn't fair. 2 parties, is that really fair? Texas has done a lot that's unfair for the whole election. The whole idea that you have to register for an election 30 days before that election, where in some states you can actually register the same day. So my only point is that the whole system should be reevaluated, but it ain't gonna happen. Like you said, it will take an act of Congress. So the people who are elected and have the power have to then give up the power. It's not gonna happen.
Jackie, you've heard this argument before. Is the breath being wasted to even have the conversation?
Well, many of our members of Congress feel that we should continue to keep our electoral college. And if we look at the history of why it's in our Constitution to begin with, our forefathers decided that it would help us with equality and equity. In other words, you would have large states would always determine the victor in every single race. And the Electoral College was put into our Constitution to allow everyone, no matter how large or small your state is, to have an equal voice. You will hear many in Congress say that the Electoral College is something that's stable in our Constitution and it's something that we need to keep. I know that Democrats were upset because of the difference in 2016, and you heard some rumblings at the beginning of the session, but that's all it's going to be. They're not going to get a majority to agree to get rid of the Electoral College.
All right, let's hope we can get a clean sweep here. Chris Tritico, weigh in.
Well, look, just because something's in the Constitution, has been in the Constitution, there's reason to leave it in there. For instance, in the original Constitution, our United States senators were not elected in a popular vote. They were appointed by the governor of the state. And at some point, somebody said that's not right. They ought to be elected. And the Constitution was amended to allow for a popular vote, citizens of the state, to allow them to elect the United States Senate. So it can be modified if the populace decides that they do not want an electoral college. But the reason the Electoral College was put into the United States Constitution was several reasons. As Jackie said, one was to ensure that larger states could not control who the president would be. But the other reason it was put in there, and the primary reason it was put in there, was to control how long it would take to elect a president. Because you got to remember that when presidents were elected in the 1700s and the early 1800s, we didn't have what we have today. And by the time it took to count the votes and send all that to Washington, it would take months and months and months. And we didn't have California in the West. We had 13 states, and so it wasn't that much space. As time went on and we have what we have today, the argument becomes, do we really need the Electoral College for the history that we put it in for time-saving measures? That becomes the argument that we need to think about. But when it's all said and done, I see no real basis to get rid of the Electoral College just because we don't like the results of the last election. That's not an argument for getting rid of the Electoral College. There may be a reason to do it, but that's not it.
All right, panel, stand by. We have some new numbers as it relates to the Texas Supreme Court. For those who voted, or those who have been watching, the panel is represented by all Republicans, and it starts with Supreme Court Justice Nathan Hecht, with 53% of the precincts reporting. He is carrying 51% of the vote to Democrat Amy Meacham's 47%, Libertarian Mark Ashe with 2%, but certainly skewing toward the Chief Justice. Jane Bland, the incumbent, heartily carrying a victory, not a victory, but a majority over Democratic challenger Kathy Chang, 4.2 million to 3.7 million votes, 53 to 47%. And, excuse me, incumbent Jeff Boyd also carrying a strong lead, 52% over Stacey Williams, 46%. Libertarian William Strange carrying 2% of the vote there as well. Also looking at Brent Busby, handily carrying a majority over Gisela Triana, the Democratic challenger, 52 to 46%. Again, the Libertarian carrying 2% as well. And then we saw the Railroad Commissioner as well. We'll get to that as the votes continue to come in, and we'll take you to break and show you some other results while we recharge what we're going to talk about on this digital version of Election Night 2020. 36Houston.com. Welcome back to our digital coverage of Election Night 2020. I'm Tom Ziska, and this is Fox26Houston.com. When we last left you, we were talking about some of the results from the Texas Supreme Court, the all-Republican panel, which rejected Republican efforts to call into question some drive-through votes here in Harris County, which called into question the future of 127,000 votes. Let's go to the panel. And panel, I know this is something you talked about on Sunday on What's Your Point, so I'm going to take my leave and let you guys have your conversation about what this means for the Supreme Court, largely looking to stay Republican in Texas.
Go ahead, Carmen.
Well, let me say this about that. So much has changed, yet so little, so much stays the same. You know, at first it looked like the Supreme Court and some of these other higher courts were going to go Democrat. It looks like they're going to stay Republican. And I got to tell you, I think that's a good thing. We have a lot of very seasoned jurists, not the least of which is our Chief Justice, Nathan Heck. And that Court of Criminal Appeals has several judges who, if we lost, we would have some rookies coming in after them. So I'm excited to see the Republican judges that are going to keep those seats in both the Court of Criminal Appeals as well as the Texas Supreme Court. Right now, our highest courts are all Republican, very few women. And so I think there'll be change in the future, but I'm glad to see not too much change. It looks like it's going to happen in this cycle.
Tony, would a few Democratic rookies hurt the Texas Supreme Court?
Let me put it this way. I think we need to have a very diverse Texas Supreme Court. We need to have different views at every level of government. One thing I'm going to challenge the Democratic Party, though, is to build that bench, not just of smart jurists, but smart candidates, and bring those things together. We were supporting what we're calling the Super 7 Latinas. 7 Latinas running as Democrats in Harris County. If they win, I haven't been able to check the numbers. If they win, they will be 10 Latinas out of 118 seats, which is about 8%. No one's been keeping track or making those numbers public. So in order to get that change up above and have candidates that even Republicans would say, hey, wow, what a solid candidate, we got to build that bench. So I think that's important to keep Texas real. And hey, it ain't right if you can come to Texas and you can find the Mexican food, but you can't find the Mexican-American politicians or jurists, et cetera.
Well, let me say this really quick, Chris, you know, just to make a note, for the first time ever in the history of the Texas.
We have 2 Latinas.
We have 4 women and 2 Latinas. And so that's
what I was
very cool. No, and what you had
about to say, the governor just appointed another woman on the court, and it's 4 women. Jackie, first time ever.
Yeah, and then that's wonderful, and I really applaud that the governor did that. And Eva Guzman is a very good friend of mine, and every time she's on the ballot, she does extremely well. I'm very happy to see that the Supreme Court justices who are on the ballot won, especially Brett Busby. I'm very close to him. But, you know, if you look at these Republican judges, and I hate it when we say Republican or Democrat judges, because many of our judges and justices really just apply the letter of the law. They are very solid individuals. They know how to do that. And their credentials are second to none. So I'm so happy to see Supreme Court and Appellate Court that our justices got reelected.
Charles, you got 10 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think they serve as a great backstop. We see a sweep in the local races in Dallas County, Harris County, a lot of the urban counties. There were Democrats have taken over the district courts. And so I think it serves as a good backstop that we have state courts that are still held by Republicans.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining us tonight on Fox26Houston.com for election night discussion. We're going to switch over right now, everything over to the newsroom for a special You Decide 2020 edition on Fox 26 News at 9.